Hi, I'm Dmitro Shvets, your host at the Start Global Insights, where I interview experts from different countries about local business secrets and international expansion experience. You are listening to the second part of the conversation with Linda Netsch, the expert with extensive experience in practicing and teaching interest-based negotiations around the world. Linda is a lecturer at Harvard, Stanford, and UCU Business School in Ukraine. She is also the general manager at the law firm Flex by Fenwick and the founder of Align Consulting, where she provides executive education and consulting services for clients in the US and internationally, including Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. In the first part, we have discussed with Linda how to negotiate internationally, and in this part, we will dive deeper into negotiation culture of the United States of America. I cannot not to use this situation because you are from the US, yeah, and we are making the podcast for exporters. And I would definitely like to understand if there are some cultural aspects in the US that you should consider while negotiating.
Yeah, and again, the U.S. is such a big place that you can. I think I've lived in at least 3 different cultures within this country, if not more. I think I've lived in 7 different states, and each one being a little bit different. But for example, right now I live in Silicon Valley. I'm very much in the tech ecosystem, very much influenced by the legal aspects of tech and the nature of the economy here. So I'm very familiar with the kinds of deals that are done when tech companies are trying to sell their products internationally. I know in the tech contracts that the law firm I work for deals with every day, there are certain issues that are constantly negotiated. So if you were trying to sell into a market here, I think I could describe some of the things that I've seen in both investing in companies here and being part of a law firm that represents companies here, in running a business that's part of that law firm. And I think, some of the stereotypes of Americans would be direct communication. That also depends very much on the people you're negotiating with. But the stereotypes would be, a little less of the relationship building. The old stereotype of, more of the Asian culture would be more, let's build a relationship first, and then we'll get down to that. But that too is a stereotype with truth and false in it. I mean, there's plenty of let's take you to the Giants baseball game, client. Let's have dinner and drinks and dinner, client. So there's certainly an awareness of the importance of the relationship. But the assumption is when you're negotiating, that's when you're down to, okay, now let's focus on the facts and figures, the law, the price, the warranty.
I think that the listeners will be very disappointed after listening to us that everything is so simple. Yeah, so from other sources, they're expecting that you need to really learn how they negotiate, tips and tricks, how to approach who is in charge in the room. Like in Japan, it might be the oldest person, or in Arab Emirates, the last one is the chief who is coming into the room, or this type of things. Or if you are in US, then you need to have this small talk about the weather. Or if the US person is asking you how are you, it doesn't mean he needs to or really wants to hear the whole story of your life.
I think that stereotype is probably one of the more accurate ones. It's funny how often I hear that. The Harvard course that I teach is very international. Often there are students from all over the world, students getting their master's in law, that are part of that program. And it's one of the most common sort of complaints, if you will, about US culture, that hi, how are you doesn't mean how are you, it means hi.
Yeah.
And now we get on to the next point. Whereas most other cultures, if you're going to take the time to ask how someone is, you might actually be curious about how they are and what their response to that might be.
Yeah, it's like you care about somebody, yeah, so about the other side.
Yeah, one of my students talked about going to Starbucks and the barista asked her how she was, and she said, "I just started to tell the person how I was," and was astounded by how off-putting that was to the person making my coffee. So yeah, sure, that those kinds of things are helpful. I think it's actually helpful to study up, if you will, in a culture. Try to learn as much as you can about what the stereotypes are, but then there is no playbook for how it
For
works
sure. Yeah.
everywhere, right? I open the playbook for how to negotiate in Silicon Valley or in Dallas. I think the importance is know that there are differences, try to see what the typical ones
Mm.
might be, and then go in with the same kinds of mindset you would have no matter where you are, which is what's motivating this person. If there is a power thing going on in your multi-party negotiation, yeah, pay attention to that. Who is the decision maker, if there is such a thing? Notice who talks, who doesn't. Notice who's paid attention to and who is not. Those can just help you understand how to influence a group of negotiators. But at the end of the day, the important thing is, learn as much as you can about what's motivating the other
Yeah.
side. Learn what you think their perception of appropriate standards, criteria are. And then even the process of putting up your own proposals and options as they go along. Each time you get negative feedback on what you've proposed, you're learning something. You might not like that you were just told they didn't like your proposal, but that gives you an opportunity to learn more about what they're thinking. And the more you learn about that, whether you're in Shanghai or in Seoul or you're in Prague, the better off you are in terms of your own ability to do deals in negotiation that satisfies your own interest
Yeah,
and
this
those of the
this
other
is the
side.
biggest problem of sales people. Without this experience of negotiations, they do not know why there was the reason of rejection. Yeah, so why they lost a deal, because even it is if it is not a common case in culture to ask for the feedback, but you still can do it. Yeah, so you still can request what's the point of this proposal and why you have not accepted that, or just give me a hint what should be done to be so this proposal would satisfy your needs. Yeah, so in the
Yep,
future, so I would
absolutely.
not waste your time, my time, and ping you with the same case again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the instinct to ask for feedback, to understand why. Look, the truth of the matter is sometimes you just won't get that answer. Um, People often don't want to say what their motivation was or why the alternative beat you on price. But regardless of whether you get the response or not, at least asking for that feedback is an important part of learning more about what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, it's like try not die. Yeah.
You try for exactly. And at the end of the day, sometimes the other party has a better alternative, right? They have a BATNA that is better than whatever you could offer. And so it's not winning doesn't mean getting every deal or beating the other side's bottom line. Winning means you got a deal that met your either you walked your alternative and you live to negotiate another day, but you got a deal that met your own interests, that you tried to create value and get as many interests built into that deal as possible. It's legal, right? It's built on some sort of standards that are enforceable or at least justifiable, and it's better than your BATNA, better than what you could have done had you walked away from that deal.
Yeah, yeah, and but I think that the main point of the interest-based negotiation is that you perceive this negotiation in the long term. So the zero sum is like you are winning now or never. But if you are in the interest based and if in the long term thinking, if you lost now, it doesn't mean that you lost the deal or you lost in life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So because so the time flies by, the people may change, the roles may change, and you learn a lot from every loss in every deal.
Mhm.
You learn a lot, and if you analyze that and you plan ahead, then every loss might be the gain in the future.
Absolutely. I think that's an important point of the viewpoint of short term versus long term. I might be able to trick you and get a great deal today, but generally that means you're not going to either not want to negotiate with me next time, or you're going to be looking to even the score the next time around. So the problem with that short-term win is it can have long-term negative consequences. And we do in courses, I'm sure you've done this as well, we do exercises where that plays out. You can see how a choice in round one where you trick the other
Mm-hmm.
side often comes back to haunt you in round 10 when the other side has the opportunity to pay you back. So shifting your mindset around that long-term versus short-term relationship versus and reputation versus short-term wins is a helpful framework to have in your own mind in negotiating.
I think this is like a heritage of the past, because in the past, when you were like living in one country and your counterpart in another, and you would like sell him or something, and you won't see him or her forever. And now
Right.
everything is so connected. Yeah. So and everything is so transparent, and this digital footprint that you have, so you can write something about some person in on the other point of the earth, and then in the or you might have a employee, and then this employee becomes very easily and very quickly a partner of the other organizations, and you would need to have business with them. So it changes so quickly, and it is so transparent that it is not already the time to cheat somebody because you will be cheated
Absolutely.
in the future.
It's a small
For
world
sure,
after
for sure.
all.
Coming back to US, yeah. So I understand. So it depends. Yeah, it's
It
like
depends.
also the best answer of the lawyers. Yeah, it depends. But are there some taboos or some things that you would be careful about? I just remember the case when I was in United States in North Dakota, and we went to a bar, and of course drinking beer and talking a lot. And then I'm so curious. I'm very curious about cultures and nations. So I was really like frank and curious about some two questions that that actually turned the evening into the disaster. The first one was about the indigenous people, and the second about Vietnam. So and the person I was talking to was a military guy, and I was like curious, why the hell you you have gone to Vietnam to fight for the war at the other side of the planet, and what have you done with the indigenous people in America? And that totally destroyed the evening. So of course, no fight appeared, but the relationship was a bit not so good after that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess those are the tricky hot button topics. Are no matter where you are in the world, are things to be cautious about. And I think you can often ask a question in a very broad way, like, "What's your point of view on U.S. and Afghanistan?" Or "How have you experienced, U.S. policy toward Russia?" Whatever it might be, a very open-ended question is probably safer if you're going to tread on that potentially dangerous
Mhm.
ground. It reminds me a bit of the first time I went. This has been many years ago now, but the first time I went to the Middle East, and I had my own kind of stereotypes of what that experience would be like. First of all, I was surprised that they were asking a woman to come and teach business people
Mhm.
negotiation in the Middle East. Again, it was a stereotype
Mhm.
that was wrong. And I remember speaking to the people who brought me over in advance, asking, what should I not do? Very, very cautious about doing the wrong thing if I was there. And I think they were kind of surprised at how fearful I was of stepping on, verbal landmines in some way, or just behavioral ones. And really, the only after talking to them for a period of time, I realized, just be humble, realize you're in someone else's set of norms. I think the only piece of advice they gave me was don't use a lot of alcohol examples. This is a dry
Don't
country.
don't don't drink while educating.
Don't drink while educating. I'm not going to use examples about buying cases of wine, right? Because you just should
Mm.
know that's your culture. Where if it's not a part of the culture, if it's not appreciated in the culture, don't talk about that. But to your examples, if you're going to talk about hot button things, American politics, right? Uh, just know you're in dangerous territory, and therefore, the more kind of open you are to just being curious about their point of view, the less you're putting judgment in your questions. And I think it's natural. If we have a strong point of view, it's natural to have our questions turn into assertions. That is, what the heck were you doing in Iraq, Americans?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That is going to have a different impact probably on a military guy than a San Francisco peacenik. But it is being very cautious when you're in territory that even if you're curious, that might be something the other side doesn't have a strong interest in talking about or hearing another point of view about.
Yeah, like one more point that I remembered, the old Ukrainians were grown up in Soviet times, yeah, so Soviet culture, and we had a lot of kind of a political friendship with Africa. So the question of racism or interracial relationship was a bit different in our country. And for example, the word Negro was quite okay, not like offensive, or we didn't mean something about the race of the other party. And you could see that in Ukraine we don't have these issues of racism, because we don't have too much of
Yeah.
relationship with that. Yeah, but I heard from my friends in US and Canada, they had a lot of problems within this situation, like actually even in some cases looking at black people, if they were white, was causing some bad reaction. Yeah, because there was a suspicion of racism from their side, although they were not in this situation meaning something with that.
Yeah. It's interesting that this assumptions we make about people's intentions versus what their impact was. I might say something that I intend to be a compliment or a curiosity that is offensive to another party, and just not even be aware of it. Much more likely that's going to happen if you're a different culture, or if there are different norms, or I think, to your point, if a culture is much more homogeneous, if you will, as opposed to extremely diverse around different races within a culture, there are just different assumptions are made about people's comments just based on the culture that you're in. And again, I think, we all make mistakes or accidentally insult all too regularly. The question is whether or not you accept that when it happens. You realize that if my behavior had a negative impact on you, I don't tell you why you shouldn't feel that way. I'm going to learn from it and then not do it again, depending on obviously the situation. But the notion is, look, if what you did hurt somebody, and it isn't a matter of principle that you have to do or say what you did, then adapt that, change, right? And I think noting that we can dial our own behavior to be okay with the people we're working with can help us be more persuasive in our negotiation and be less likely to provoke others. And at the end of the day, we all make mistakes, and the more we're willing to own them when we make them, forgive them when they happen to us, and be curious about why that happened, I think that helps with a broad kind of issues that we're talking about around cultural difference, racial difference, gender difference. Again, humility is a good trait in negotiation. Not always valued, as we can certainly see among some very prominent people in the world. But at least I'm going to stand on the principle that humility is a good quality, listening is a good quality, curiosity is a great quality. And that's just my own perspective on what helps you be a more successful negotiator.
Yeah, and at least it is always helpful. Yeah, it might be that you won't be able to use it to some extent in some cases when you cannot influence the situation, but it will be helpful for your conclusion for the future when you meet such people again.
Just one last around this notion of kind of curiosity, listening. I think one of the areas we explore often in negotiation courses is the distinction between empathy and assertiveness. and that those two things can be in tension, right? Empathy being, if we define that as the ability to understand the point of view of the other side of another person, not necessarily agree with it, but at least understand it, and try to communicate it to the other side that they actually believe you understand them. So I not only do understand you, I communicate back to you what I understand you're thinking to your satisfaction. Yeah, you believe I got it. That's the empathy piece. So the empathy is focused on the point of view of the other. The assertiveness is standing up for your own interests, your own point of view, making sure that your standards are also discussed in a negotiation. And both of those are important. Some people are very good on the empathy, but not very strong at standing up for themselves or saying what they really think or making sure that their interests are also met. So if you're good at empathy, you probably have to work on your assertiveness muscle. On the other hand, there are plenty of people who are very good on the assertiveness side, saying what they want, demanding what they want, but not good at understanding the perspective of the other side or what the other side wants or what the other side feels. And so if your strong suit is assertiveness, probably what you should do is work on your empathy muscle, because you need both of them. It's not an either or, it is a both. And then it's in any given situation, even back to your conversation about like talking about difficult topics. That's one, maybe you want to lean on the empathy skills a bit more, right? And just understand the other person's point of view. Whereas if I'm with a negotiator, it's very dominant, very zero sum. I've got to lean on my assertiveness skills and work harder on, making sure that I also am having my needs met in the negotiation. And just that awareness and that simple, we talked a lot today about gray areas and it depends, lawyer's favorite phrase, it depends. But there are some fundamental things that are very helpful. Interest versus position and empathy versus assertiveness. Just those concepts can help guide you when you're in this kind of messy world of human communication and human relationships.
I've recently saw, like in social media, some shorts in YouTube. The guy was saying that I learned a very useful word that sounds like interesting. So if you meet somebody and he says you something that you are not agree with, take a moment and say, interesting. If you will use this word, it will help you to get the answers, what is going on, and time to think.
And I actually think there's something to that. It's good to have, when something hits you wrong, it's good to have a more neutral thing to say besides,
Yeah.
what the heck is wrong with you? Right. And interesting might be a good thing to rely on when you are thinking that's crazy. But when you tell somebody they're crazy or you think they're just flat out wrong, often that's not going to make them open up more. It's going to make them fight more, maybe. But maybe having some of those kind of crutches on how to deal with the behavior that we don't like interesting, is a good tool.
Let's come back to the Harvard methodology and the key elements that you said. We were talking a lot about interest, yeah. So, and I think that this point that you said about assertiveness and empathy is about these two sides of interest. So you need to understand your interests, yeah. So you need to understand what do you want, and this is actually also quite tough tasks, and it seems obvious, but when you are sitting and writing them down, it is quite hard to figure out what is your interest actually in this negotiation. And then the empathy is for the interests of the other party. And here is the main question I hear is how can I understand when I'm preparing for negotiation? So I'm not talking to the person. Yeah, so I'm guessing.
Right.
How can I imagine or how can I understand the interests of the other party? What is the approaches, or how can I predict that? Are there any advices how people can do that?
One thing I think in your question, in the lead up to the question, that's very helpful is to do that preparation. I think too often we don't have a systematic way to prepare. And even if you take the few minutes of being disciplined around what you said, which is take a piece of paper, write my interests, write their interests, and try to brainstorm, if you will, think about as many as you can possibly come up with. Challenge yourself to do that, your own first, and then what you think the other sides are. And to your point, before you have a chance to speak with them, how do you know? Well, in this day and age, there are ways of researching, people's past. It could be, what their jobs have been in the past. It could be what they've said on social media. It could be what their likes are on social media. You can at least try to build some assumptions about the other side. If they're a complete stranger, that's a good place to start. If there are other people who know this person that you're able to communicate with, that can be helpful as well. And so to work on any ways of learning more about them, but also even if you don't have that, you can make some educated guesses, some logical guesses perhaps around what you think motivates them. Money is always, depending on obviously the negotiation, you can assume some things about what people want, but also try to challenge yourself to be broader than just they want money and they want credit, right? Well, what else do they want? How much does creative control mean to them? How much does selling this to their boss or their constituents mean, right? To really try to put yourself, that old saying, put yourself in their shoes to the best extent you can. And then realize as you look at your list of what you want and what they want, my interests and their interests, notice that your list of their interest is something you should be asking questions about. Are you right? Like their responses to discussions about what appropriate salary are or appropriate price for the object being sold. That helps you learn whether or not you're right about their priorities and what their interests might be as well. So the main point, though, is that preparation piece in advance. If you can learn more about them, great, do, however that might be, do your research. But if nothing, people often say, oh, it's just so much work to do these long preparation sheets and come up with all these.
And it's common sense, so why should I write
exactly.
it down? Everything is obvious, yeah. So
right. I mean, why do you write down a grocery list? Because you might not remember the thing in the moment.
Good point.
The power of actually typing out or writing out those it's helpful for the creative process, if you will, right? If I see my list of my interests next to yours, that might prompt some ideas on ways we could do this deal or things we might agree on that weren't so obvious when I was just doing it all in my head. And so if I said, what's the fastest preparation process you can use? Write out your interests and their interests, and then be careful about, whether you're accurate on their interests, learn during the negotiation. Write out your alternatives and theirs, right? What are you going to do if this falls apart? And what do you think they're going to do if this falls apart? Again, you might ask some questions aimed at understanding whether or not your perception of their alternatives are accurate. What are relevant standards? Do I have a legal case that applies? Do I have market research that shows, the option I'm proposing will work? And that process alone, my interest, their interest, my alternative, their alternative, what are relevant standards? Looking at that often shows you a variety of options that you might be able to agree on in the course of the negotiation. That doesn't take all day.
Yeah, and actually on this list you can see already what connects, what interests are common. Yeah, and what you can promote as a common interest and get the common outcome of the negotiations.
Yep.
In this case.
And one thing that isn't part of the 7 elements, but I have found is really helpful is particularly when you're doing the interest lists of mine and theirs, is what resources and capabilities do you have that might be of value to them, or that you just have, whether you've thought about whether they care or not. And same for them, right? What do they have? What connections, other products, relationships, know-how, what do they have that's of value to me? That combination of the things you want and what you can offer and the things they want and what they can offer can be a really rich list for possible options that are better for both sides and that capture as much value as possible.
Yeah, I think that this is a very good thing exactly in this, in our question of intercultural or inter-country, international negotiations, because in most cases, the exporters, at least what I hear, when they are selling something abroad, they are thinking about only price. So it's like, I will sell cheaper. But
Right.
then if you are thinking broadly, if you brainstorm, then you can find out much more values that you can propose to your counterpart in other country that they do not have now, because the cheap price, and
Yeah.
everybody is complaining about the China. Yeah, so the cheapest price is coming from China, so you cannot compete. But in fact, you can compete. We had the case with Canadians that said that they are tired of China. They are tired of the
Yeah.
misconceptions or different understandings. So they are very lucky to have like Ukrainian furniture, because it takes the same amount of time to deliver that to Canada, and but the same quality or even better, and price is not that much important in this case, because you are getting much more value in
Mhm.
communicating or predictability of the delivery. So you order the chair, you got a chair, and that's what the value for them might be.
Yeah. One thing that I think about, particularly now with Ukraine and thinking about exporting or dealing with countries beyond Ukraine. Obviously, Western Europe is a closer market for Ukrainian goods and services, and obviously huge challenges, even just getting things in and out of the country right now. But at least from my experience in interacting with Americans, if you will, and knowing that that's a way too broad a topic. But there is, for a country as divided as we can be, there is by and large an interest in Ukraine and Ukraine being successful, and Ukrainian people, more of an understanding and awareness and appreciation for Ukraine now than probably ever in the history of America. And maybe that's a good thing for both after the victory, and now, is in realizing that an interest that many Americans have is supporting the
Mm.
cause and being helpful. And I know several people that I've talked to have said, yeah, but what can I do? I give my dollars to the Red Cross, or
I paid taxes that were paid to the missiles, and
right.
hopefully F-16s soon.
I paid for the Patriot missile now, but I do think that there is an interest and for some people a frustration that there isn't more um, that one can do. When I went to Ukraine earlier this year, there were people who thought I was crazy, but then there were other people who were really, for lack of a
Mm.
better word, jealous and inspired by the opportunity to even interact with people who are dealing with this, but dealing with it with so much kind of class and grace. And so I guess I'm just offering that as in this current context, there's maybe more interest in trying to be supportive, whether it's helping a business grow or promoting a product or even promoting awareness. Don't under it. I guess my advice to Ukrainian business folks is don't underestimate that there's a large segment of American population that would like to do business to support Ukrainian both recovery and development during and after
Mm.
the war.
Yeah, good point to add this value, yeah, this emotional value. And coming back to the methodology and the question about emotions exactly. So a lot of questions about that. How to deal with conflict negotiation. So if you are in the conflict, if the other party is emotionally unstable, or you are emotionally unstable, yes, so you heard something
Mhm.
not very pleasant for you. Do you have any tools or approaches how to do that in these conflict situations and behave like a human? Yeah, or use this emotions to drive the negotiations in the direction that will be successful.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously an important topic with a lot of different angles to explore. But I would say, to kind of at the foundation, it is around emotions. Awareness is the first step, and so becoming more self-aware around the things that provoke you. What are the kinds of things that are likely to throw me off? In negotiation courses, we often have people think through what are behaviors of your negotiating counterparts that are hot buttons for you, that are one where you might have your negative emotions get triggered such that your logical brain gets suppressed. And the more you it's kind of immunizing yourself, if you will. The more you start to think about those things and be able to manage them in advance, like realize, this person's going to insult me. This person is going to interrupt me, talk over me, not listen to me. The more you get prepared for that, the more you can hopefully avoid to some degree the trigger that, again, makes you generally we're less successful when we're just being reactionary, fight or flight like. And so if we can resist the urge, the first step is get to know yourself better, right? Predict what's going to set you off and think through ways you can avoid having that derail you. Then other things that can help. If you really think like this, I'm not going to be as effective as I wish I could be because of the nature of my history with this person, or the things that I think, the topics that are going to be raised too much for me. That's when you might want to get someone to stand in for you, right? Have a mediator there. Be willing to call timeouts when you feel your blood pressure rising, if at all possible, to even just call a timeout and take a deep breath. I know, again, sounds kind of trivial, but it's surprisingly important to give yourself a little bit of space if you don't have control, to whatever extent we ever have control, over our kind of emotional reactions to really hot button things. And then things like we've talked about a little bit before is if you can train yourself to think about impact versus intent. Like when someone does something, the impact on me is very negative. I often assume the worst about what their intentions are. And that makes it even worse, right? If I think you intended to insult me and you want me to be hurt, then I'm even madder at you. And then I want to fight back more. And just kind of getting a little better at thinking through, okay, well, maybe that was his or her intention, but maybe not. Maybe he's oblivious. Maybe she just didn't know that was offensive. Maybe she just talks like that all the time and it landed particularly badly on me. So that intent impact shift can help you at least not be as provoked when the impact on you is bad, to not assume the worst about the intentions of the other side. And again, I'm not Pollyanna. I'm not naive about how sometimes people do want to hurt you, but recognize it's in your own self-interest to not get provoked by that behavior. And so I think, preparing yourself in advance, what's likely to provoke me and what am I going to do? Being willing to call timeouts. I think it's okay to practice also how you respond to something that is like a matter of principle not okay with you, right? Like, okay, if you're going to make that assertion about, my ethics, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to go forward. So I'd like to request that we not have that be part of this negotiation, because I think that will only be destructive, right? So even just having some practice around how you might respond to where you want to be assertive about behavior that you think needs to be called out as opposed to just ignored, that can help you be a little bit more calm. Again, the more we're just driven by pure emotional reaction, our kind of instinct emotional reaction is fight or flight. And usually that's not the best response. If you're trying to escape the animal that's going to eat you, maybe fight or flight makes sense. But if you're dealing with another human being who's trying to have their own interests met, usually fight or flight is not the best approach.
So the preparation and practice. Yeah. So these are the main things to avoid emotional statements that will not be manageable. At the negotiations.
And the preparation is often about yourself too, like being self-aware, thinking through really what it is that
and
provokes
be true to
me.
yourself. Yeah. So not to lie to yourself that you won't react on that or this situation.
Right.
So we're describing the ideal psychic healthy person, which is almost impossible, especially in current situation.
Yeah. I don't know that person and I'm not that person, but I do. I think the more we're striving for that, at least we have the goal, right? And at least we know where we're going to fall short sometimes, but it's much better to at least know what the constructive responses are and have those guide us. I know from years of working with this material, I'm much better at dealing with not perfect. And I certainly still fall prey to some of the things that happen to humans in negotiation. But I think just lots of practice and awareness means I'm a lot better at not getting provoked, and I'm a lot more logical, if you will, around what can I do that will actually help me get what I want here, as opposed to just that short-term interest is often fight or flight, right? I want to get my jab in now, but I think the more you're able to resist those short-term impulses for long-term gain, that helps you not make some of those bad choices.
Yeah, true. I totally agree. One idea came to my mind recently when I was thinking about these emotional reactions in my negotiations, is that to turn your you should be careful that here as well, but to turn your reaction into question. So it's like if you would like to react negatively to somebody's words about you, and then you want to say the same words to him or her, but then turn this into questions like paraphrase. Yeah. So do I understand correct that
Right.
that you just sent me to the concrete direction?
Yeah.
And even if it would be funny, it will be still better than to react with fight with fight response.
Yeah, well, and is absolutely right. And so it could almost turn into something funny, right? If I'm paraphrasing an allegation that I just lied. So if I understand you correctly, you think I'm a liar. I obviously don't think that, right? And you can. I think there's a power in humor. It's another cultural, an individualistic thing you have to be careful with, but it can be disarming, especially when the heat is turned up. To smile, to say something, especially self-deprecating humor, as opposed to humor directed at the other person. There are cultural differences around this, and again, but I do think that humor tends to cool the temperature down. It's not, again, provocative humor, and that can be something that, if you're good at it, can be a really powerful negotiation tool as well.
One more thing is that while you are asking the question and hearing the another answer, it takes time. So
Yes.
it takes time for the signal to go to your normal brain and not the lizard brain. Yeah, so not to think over that situation. So you give yourself time to calm down or to breathe.
Yeah. And even if you say something like, well, it's very hard for me to hear that you think I'm dishonest. Right? Just giving voice to your own feelings in a way that the other side is not likely to react to can both slow things down, to your point, but also signal to the other side how you're feeling, because they may not be aware
For sure.
of how you're reacting to the particular situation.
Good, Linda. This was amazing conversation.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this topic with you, and certainly welcome the opportunity to interact with you and your audience.
Thank you. Thank you.